Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about how two important ways of thinking come together. The first is postcolonialism, which studies the lasting effects of colonial rule on countries like India. The second is ecofeminism, which shows how the abuse of women and the abuse of nature are connected together. Postcolonial scholars focus on national identity, political freedom, racism, and why people move from one country to another. Environmental scholars focus on saving forests and wildlife. They sometimes forgot about poor people and their basic needs. In countries like India, the destruction of nature was not just an accident. When forests are cut down, when rivers become poisonous, when millions of people are forced to leave their ancestral lands, these things happen for clear reasons. They happen because of a global economy run by big corporations. They happen because the Indian government, even after independence from Britain, chose a path of fast industrial growth that hurts poor people and the environment. Postcolonial ecofeminism gives us a way to understand this reality. It argues that destroying nature is deeply connected to oppressing women, poor people, and lower caste groups. When we hurt the earth, we also hurt the most vulnerable people. And when we hurt those people, we also hurt the earth. In The God of Small Things, Arundhati Roy shows us this connection. She does not just write a sad family story, she does not just complain about pollution. Instead, she shows how rigid ways of thinking that put men above women, humans above nature, and upper caste above untouchables work together to justify violence and exploitation. Before we look closely at Roy's novel, we need to learn two main concepts. First, hierarchical dualism. This is a fancy phrase for a simple idea. Western thinking has long divided the world into pairs of opposites. Here are some examples: culture versus nature, man versus woman, reason versus emotion, developed versus underdeveloped. At first glance, these look like simple descriptions, but they are not neutral. The first word in each pair is seen as better, stronger, and more important. The second word is seen as weaker, less important, something that can be used and thrown away. So nature becomes just a pile of raw materials waiting for humans to use it. Women become associated with nature, which means they also become seen as passive and easy to control. The same thing happens to colonized people and lower caste communities. Second is capitalist patriarchy. This is another important phrase. Maria Myers explained that patriarchy, the system where men rule over women, is not separate from capitalism. They work together. The global economy depends heavily on work for free or very little money. Women cook, clean, raise children, and take care of elderly people. This work keeps the economy running, but it is treated like air or water, something freely available that does not need to be paid for. When a post colonial country like India chooses rapid industrialization, it mixes old male dominance with new corporate profits. This combination is very dangerous for poor people and for nature. Vandana Shiva calls modern development projects a new project of Western patriarchy. This kind of development sees progress only as economic growth. It loves big dams, big factories, and big highways. It treats the destruction of local nature and the suffering of rural women as an acceptable price to pay. Postcolonial ecofeminism teaches us that we cannot solve environmental problems without also fighting against sexism, racism, and caste discrimination. In The God of Small Things, Roy shows us these ideas through the town of Ayamanam in Kerala. The main symbol of environmental destruction is the Meenachil River. When the character Esther returns home after 23 years away, he does not find the clean river he remembers. Instead, he finds a river ruined by government projects and international loans. The river now smells like sewage and pesticides. The water is thick and poisonous. Dead fish float on the surface with rotting fins and boils on their bodies. The old history house, once owned by an English colonial settler named Karisaipu, has been turned into a fancy resort called God's Own Country. Rich foreign tourists come to visit. They arrive on loud speedboats that leave a dark film of gasoline on the water. The river has become so toxic that the hotel managers have to put up signs saying no swimming. They write these signs in beautiful handwriting, hiding the ecological disaster behind pretty letters. There is also a tall wall around the resort. The wall hides a nearby slum. Rich tourists do not have to see the poverty that their vacation money helps create. Roy calls this whole setup a smelly paradise. This phrase captures the deep contradiction of modern development. The government celebrates the new hotel and the foreign money as signs of success, but local people find their environment destroyed and their traditional way of life gone forever. What caused this ecological damage? Two things. First, the government built a saltwater barrage downriver. This structure was meant to block saltwater so that rich farmers could grow two rice crops a year instead of one. But this engineering project destroyed the natural balance of the backwaters. Dead fish lay scattered on the mud banks. Second, the river now smells strongly of chemicals and pesticides. These chemicals were bought with international loans from organizations like the World Bank. This shows how global financial systems directly change local environments. Through these descriptions, Roy shows that environmental problems are always linked to economic injustice. The destruction of the Meenachil River happens slowly out of sight of most people, but its worst effects fall on the poorest members of society. To understand Roy's message, we need to look at her critique of big things versus small things. In her political writings, Roy attacks the government's love for large scale development projects like massive dams. She writes, the dismantling of the big bombs, big dams, big ideologies, big contradictions, big countries, big wars, big heroes, big mistakes. Perhaps it will be the century of the small. What are these big things? They are the powerful systems that control society from the top down. They include Western development agencies, national governments, and corporate elites. These groups use abstract economic logic to justify their actions. They say that destroying local ecosystems or forcing poor villages to move is unfortunate but necessary for the greater common good. But whose good are we talking about? David Hopper was a former vice president of the World Bank for South Asia. He was asked why the World Bank often did not include proper drainage systems in its big dam projects. Hopper admitted that building proper drainage would make the projects too expensive. It would not be cost effective for international investors. So because of this financial calculation, World Bank funded dams caused widespread flooding. Entire villages were submerged underwater. Millions of poor people were forced to leave their homes. They became developmental refugees. Their land and water were taken away to provide electricity and irrigation for wealthy cities and powerful farming lobbies. In The God of Small Things, this predatory economic logic is shown to be a modern version of old colonial domination. The post independence government, local corporations, and global capital all work together. They frame progress as big centralized projects. They silence the small voices of people who live close to the earth. They ignore sustainable local ways of living, and poor people are left to bear the environmental costs of corporate wealth. In the novel, the family owned factory called Paradise Pickles and Preserves is a small example of this larger system. The character Chaco is Ammu's Oxford educated brother. He represents the capitalist patriarch. When Chaco returns from England, he takes over his mother Mamachi's small pickling business. He registers it as a formal company and expands it. Chaco constantly uses possessive language. He says, "My factory, my pineapples, my pickles." He tells his mother that she is just his sleeping partner. He takes away her daily control over the business she built with her own hands in her own kitchen. At the same time, Chaco relies heavily on his sister Ammu's hard work. Ammu works long hours in the factory helping to manage production, but Chaco reminds her that as a divorced woman, she has no claim to the family property. A daughter, he says, has no right to an equal share of the family wealth. This is exactly how capitalist accumulation works. By calling Ammu's and Mamache's essential work family duties rather than real professional labor, Chaco takes their energy without paying them fairly. He turns their domestic skills into private property that he alone controls. Ammu recognizes this injustice. She calls it the natural behavior of a male chauvinist society. Her resistance shows her deep understanding of how the law keeps women financially dependent on men. The novel shows that patriarchal violence does not hit all women the same way. It combines with class and caste to enforce control. Let us look at Ammu's life. As a child, she watches her father Papachi regularly beat her mother with brass vases. Papachi's violence gets worse after he retires because his sense of male superiority is threatened by his wife's successful pickling business. He denies Ammu a college education, saying university fees are an unnecessary expense for a girl. To escape this abusive home, Ammu marries a Hindu tea estate worker, but her husband turns out to be an alcoholic. When his English manager threatens to fire him, the husband tries to save his job by suggesting that Ammu be sent to the manager's private bungalow to be looked after. This shocking proposal treats Ammu's body as something to be traded for economic security. When Ammu refuses, her husband attacks her violently. She has to return to her family home with her twin children, where she is treated as an unwanted outcast. Now, notice the double standard. Chaco has promiscuous affairs with poor female factory workers. His mother Mamachi dismisses this as man's needs. She even pays for a separate entrance to his room so these lower class women can enter secretly without damaging the family's respectable image. But when Mamachi learns that Ammu has entered a secret loving relationship with Veluta, an untouchable Paravan carpenter who works in the factory, she reacts with intense rage and disgust. She imagines a Paravan's black hand on her daughter's breast. She compares their consensual relationship to the behavior of wild animals. This deep disgust shows how caste prejudice and patriarchal control work together. Chaco's sexual exploitation of poor female workers is accepted because it maintains his position as an upper caste property owner. But Ammu's love for Veluta is treated as a dangerous crime because it values the humanity of an untouchable. Their love directly challenges the social hierarchies that secure the family's wealth and privilege. To understand the full picture, we must look at Veluta the subaltern. Subaltern is a person who occupies the lowest position in society because of class, caste, gender, or age. Veluta's family lives in a small laterite hut. It is low to the ground, downriver from the main house. The hut is divided into just four small corners: one corner for cooking, one corner for clothes, one corner for bedding rolls, and one corner for dying in. This tiny home stands in sharp contrast to the luxurious resort and the comfortable family estate. It shows how top down economic development worsens the situation of lower caste groups. They are shut out from clean water, safe land, and financial security. Roy uses this family's history to challenge ideas of progress. Under British colonial rule, many untouchables converted to Christianity. Missionaries promised that the new faith would free them from Hindu caste discrimination. But after India achieved independence, the government declared that these Christian converts were no longer eligible for state welfare benefits job reservations, or low interest bank loans. So these families jumped from the frying pan into the fire. Veluta is a highly skilled carpenter and an expert mechanic. He understands the factory machinery better than anyone else. But because of his untouchable status, his talents are exploited by Chaco for very low pay. His body and his technical labor are used to generate profit for upper caste owners, while he is denied any personal security or social respect. Veluta offers an alternative to the destructive mindset of capitalist patriarchy. Unlike Chaco, who views nature as raw ingredients for his profit driven factory, Veluta practices what Vandanashiva calls holistic and ecological ways of knowing. Chaco sees nature as an object to be manipulated for profit. He focuses on mechanization, property, and ownership. Veluta understands and respects the cyclical patterns of nature. He lives in harmony with small insects, trees, and water. He uses his mechanical skills to rebuild and repair, not to exploit. Roy highlights this connection in a beautiful passage where Ammu watches Veluta emerge from the Meenachal river. His feet touch the muddy riverbed as he rose from the dark river and walked up the stone steps. She saw that the world they stood in was his, that he belonged to it, that it belonged to him. The water, the mud, the trees, the fish, the stars. For Ammu and Veluta, the river and its wildlife are not things to be bought and sold. They are natural allies that help build genuine links between human beings and the earth. Their secret loving relationship across caste lines combines their unique vulnerabilities. Ammu brings her perspective as a woman cast out by her family. Veluta brings his reality as an exploited worker. Their bond directly challenges the hierarchies that justify the abuse of both nature and people. The tragic ending of the novel shows that powerful systems rarely allow their boundaries to be crossed without violent response. When the family discovers Ammu and Veluta's relationship, they turn to the police to enforce control. The police hunt down Veluta. They surround him at the history house and beat him nearly to death. This is not just random police cruelty, it is institutional violence designed to protect a rigid social order. To hide their actions, the police terrify Ammu's young twin children, Esther and Rahel. They force the children to make a false statement accusing Veluta of kidnapping them and causing the accidental drowning of their cousin Sophie Moore. Veluta dies from his injuries alone in a prison cell. Ammu is driven away from her home and dies in poverty in a lonely hotel room. The twin children are separated and spend 23 years drifting apart, carrying the deep trauma of what they were forced to say. This tragedy shows how dominant systems operate. Just as the state uses walls and petty signs to hide the pollution of the river, it uses forced confessions and police power to silence human resistance. The destruction of Veluta's body and the ruining of Meenachal River are parts of the same process. A top down model of progress sacrifices the small things to preserve the wealth and power of the big things.